bum, da-da-dum, dum, dum, da-da-dum, bum, bum, ba-dum, dum, dum, da-dum, funky fantasy, dum, da-dum, dum, 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 da-dum, dum, dum, the bull, dum, 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 da-da, Stratoceros, bum, ba-da-dum, da-da-dum, da-da-dum, the war of nerds, dum, da-dum, history style. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to the War of Nerds podcast episode. I have no idea because I've lost track, but still, the bearded nerdy hosts are here with an episode. And today, we're talking about different movies and even books that fall into the category of history, where we've seen curators, different types of stuff that have involved Indiana Jones, Night at the Museum, National Treasure, etc., etc. And so, to start this episode off, gentlemen, I would like each of you to tell me what your favorite movie or series is that falls into that genre of history or adventure or exploration.
So I'm going to say our resident curator starts off.
All right, I'm fine with that. I am definitely an Indiana Jones fanatic, although I have not seen the newest movie. I've heard it's good compared to Crystal Skull that we just forget ever happened. But I am a huge Indiana Jones fan. I'm also a huge history fan. I did go to school to become a history major. Long story, twists and turns of life, I am not, but my objective was to be a museum curator, and that's why Alfred has called me the curator. I mean, I wonder if that's ever going to stick. But anyways,
Next
I
episode.
yeah, I am obsessed with the idea of bringing history into literature. Um, Even if it's talking about like Greek mythology, if it's talking about Roman military history, like the movies and shows that have come out over the last few years have just been super impactful in telling the stories that aren't true, but follow that this could have happened in that time because of all the things that happened alongside of it. And they hold enough of the detail as historically accurate, at least to what we know, because obviously history is in the person who tells it. But they hold enough of that accurate that we can buy the stories they create for these people in those times. So for me personally, Indiana Jones, I'm a huge Harrison Ford fan. I love the series, the first three movies. I will watch them over and over and over again. I have the box set behind me. Again, Crystal Skull had its moments, went on a different way that I would never have gone, but I do like Shia LaBeouf, or at least I did for a while there, and I did like that they brought him into it. But just the story is what killed it for that movie, and I do really want to watch the new one. My father told me it was excellent. He's also a huge Indiana Jones fan, kind of got me into it. So I will get around to it, but I haven't watched it yet. But long story short, that's my answer.
To the Crystal Skull, I'm just going to say this. Oh, I am Galadriel. The rings of power are here. I did Galadriel, but I'm actually villain in Indiana Jones, playing a Russian mobster going after. That was the worst movie ever. I mean, you go from The Last Crusade with literally Sean Connery and Harrison Ford, and it was so good. Like for me, obviously Raiders of the Lost Ark is the best one. It just happened to be the first one, but I think it's the best one, and I think The Last Crusade is the second best one. Um, Temple of Doom's technically a precursor to Raiders of the
Hmm.
Lost Ark, so it's kind of an odd being number two. Um, but Temple of Doom was okay. But for me, Raiders is number one, and Last Crusade. They're really up neck and neck with each other. I like them
Yeah.
both equally. Quite frankly, they're just both so good. Um, but Kingdom of the Crystal Skull was just literally a scar on my existence, and I hope that I can forget that it exists, just like the Fantastic Four reboot. Um, so shots fired. So for me, I am I love Indiana Jones. I'm not quite there with you, Ryan, as it's what my favorite one is National Treasure.
Hmm.
Um, National Treasure is, I mean, not only do you have Nick Cage, which that's the OG uh, Ghost Rider there. That's the He's not the Robbie Reyes version from Agents of Shield, but he was. I love Nick Cage. There's a lot of Nick Cage memes out there that are funny too. I should have saved one for this episode. Oh well. Um, I really like National Treasure and Night at the Museum with Ben Stiller. And I have to just say the thing where Ben Stiller tries to grab it from Hank Azaria's character. He's just like, "No, you did not touch. Do not cross this line." I will never forget that part of that movie. And the late great Robin Williams playing a young, small version of Teddy Roosevelt, and just all the other added stuff of all the historical figures from our history of the world, all in this museum where Ben Stiller's playing this basically security guard at a museum, and it comes to life, you know, after everybody goes away. And it was just such a creative movie that I never really thought we were going to get something like that. And then when we did, I was like, man, this is up there with National Treasure, Indiana Jones, and other movies that are similar to that. So for me, all of those I think are equally great series. And this is a full circle from our first episode for you listeners who remember. Ryan mentioned about the curator thing, and so did Alfred. And I said, one day we're going to have an episode about this. So here we are, as promised. And I'm going to drop about the curator like I did then. I can never forget the curator from Ready Player One, even though it's not to the historical side of things. It was just the version of the character that I just really, truly, the history of the game, the history of the creator. And this curator happened to be the dude, his partner. And it was just really a creative, and I love the actor too. The dude played Scotty, Simon Pegg. He's fantastic. Anyways, Alfred, please take it before I start rambling again.
So I'm with Ryan. Indiana Jones is near and dear to my heart. I've heard great things of the fifth movie. I have not seen it either, but I want to because I've just heard that it captures Indiana Jones again. And I remember because my dad tried to show it to me time and time again. The No Doubt song, Oi to the World, it's got the line, and Haji had a sword like the guy from Indiana Jones. And I love that song. So he tried to show it to me, and I just blew it off, fell asleep during it. And The Last Crusade became my favorite Indiana Jones movie. Watching it over and over again, the supernatural aspects plus the the history aspect of it.
Mm-hmm.
But Ryan already spoke about Indiana Jones, so I'm not gonna say that is my favorite, even though it really is. But I'm gonna go with book avenue. So Dan Brown's Robert Langdon series, the Da Vinci Code, Angels and Demons, Origin, all the other stories that he has. He's a linguist, but a good majority of the books that are put out in Dan Brown series deal with museums, art, history, different secret societies, that kind of thing, which is National Treasure esque. But Dan Brown's Robert Langdon series is one that I've fallen in love with. I love the fast paced thriller aspects mixed with the history and how he intertwines all of these major figures in our past and then brings them into the future with all these different conspiracy theories and how they connect, and then building a story around that.
Absolutely, that's a good
Very
answer.
nice. Now, when it comes to historical books, and we've talked about this before too, I do feel like the genre of not just retellings, but like adding a historical side to it and doing a historical type telling. Talked about it before, like let's say the Vietnam War. Instead of people coming back with Agent Orange, they're coming back with some zombie disease that they picked up from jungle warfare. And now you've got that little twist on that side of history, and you end up with a series. I would like to see more stuff like that, or just more movies that are kind of centered around the whole Tomb Raider or Indiana Jones or Nathan Drake and things like that. Like Uncharted was one of my favorite video games for PlayStation for the longest time. And then when I saw they were doing the movie with the guy who played Tom Holland, who played Spider-Man in the MCU, and he played Nathan Drake, and he just nailed it. I think.
I thought it was a great movie.
It was fantastic. And again, you and me, Ryan, we're on the same page where we love those types of movies
Mhm.
that take that adventure, history, mythology aspect of it. So when we come to mythology, Ryan, I want to ask you, what are your opinions on the Percy Jackson and the Olympian series? Not just
So
the books, the movies.
I can only speak because we've talked about this a lot on this podcast. I have not read a lot. Like I'm very limited on what I've read. I do know a lot about his series, and because I've listened to a lot of people talk on it that have really appreciated it. I did enjoy the movies. I have not watched the new Disney reboot of it, which I don't know if it's a series or if it's a movie. But they're redoing the Percy
Series.
Jackson. Yeah. Um, but I do think he has a very creative edge um, in what he was able to accomplish with that series, and to bring in I not if correct me if I'm wrong, Alfred, but not just Greek mythology. He starts pulling from other mythologies as well, right? And they kind of intermingle. Um,
I do think there's small crossovers in general. I don't know if he's written any specific book crossovers, but he touches on basically every mythology,
mhm.
and he does Norse, Egyptian, Greek, Roman. I don't know if he's dabbled in others yet, uh, but it's different series with the different mythologies, except Roman and Greek tie together.
Yeah, but they're all in the same world though, right? They just
I imagine. Yeah,
okay.
I'm pretty sure they are. I haven't. I only read a handful after the Percy Jackson series.
Yeah. But I do have a great appreciation for how he's tied in those specific mythologies and taken it into the modern day, and again pulled some historic accuracy into his stories as well. So
Speaking of that too, have you seen the movie? I think it's called Titan. It's got Liam Neeson plays the dude's father. Liam Neeson plays Zeus. Um,
was it Titan?
and or not, no, not Titan.
There's
There's
several.
Clash
There's
of the Titans.
Clash of the Titans, which I
Clash
think
of
yeah,
Titans. Did you
and then
see that
there's
movie?
yeah, then there's the Immortals. Like they both came out at the exact same time. Both fantastic movies. But I am like all for it. You give me any Greek or Roman deity or historical legend, so because some of them are just humans that did great feats. Odyssey, anything like that. If you make a movie about it, I don't care if it is a B movie with no name actors with a $10,000 budget. I will watch that movie hands down. Because even like The Rock's portrayal, the twist of Hercules, fantastic movie, if you ask me. It was a completely different look on Hercules, as if he's a strong guy, but not actually a demigod, and like the feats that he's performed weren't actually the real feats. They were all like him and his team were able to defeat something, but they make it look like Hercules is this heroic person, but it's all kind of like, oh, we did this to make it look like this, but we really did do this, but like hard to explain. But like any of those movies, hands down, like you have me hooked. Like that was supposed to be like my area of expertise when I continued my history major, was going to be in Greek and Roman military and mythology. Like that was the area I wanted to delve deep
Oh,
into. So I'm sold on anything to do with those.
The
that's cool.
the Clash of the Titans.
Hmm.
The dude who was in Avatar who played
Yep.
Sully. I thought he did a great job as the
Yep.
main character. And then obviously Liam Neeson as Zeus was like fantastic. You don't get much better than that.
No.
But we were speaking about the mythology part again, and can we all agree that the Mummy movie with Tom Cruise was just enough to make you want to like not want to watch a mythology movie for a while again?
Nathan, you know my opinion on Tom Cruise to begin with.
Forget about Tom Cruise. I'm just talking about that movie in general.
But yes, the fact that he was in it made me not want to watch it. After seeing 10 minutes of it, I did not finish that movie. However, the first two Mummies are among two of my top movie series ever. The third one they did, where the
Yeah.
son grows up, took the series down a path that just lost me completely. And then Tom Cruise's was the fourth rendition in it. And by then I was out of that series. They had already let me down with the third one. And then you bring in Tom Cruise, an actor again that I've publicly said I dislike. is not going to win me back to a series that has already lost my vote. But I agree with you. That is like should have never happened.
The worst part too for me is like you have the original Boris Karloff Mummy, and
Mhm.
that's a very classic monster movie. And then you move into Brendan Fraser and the Mummy, and it almost felt like a different style, which was great. It made the Mummy unique in its own. It was still a monster movie, but it was different.
Mhm.
And then you bring in Tom Cruise for that monster, and he becomes the main character, and it just didn't fit with what they were doing because at that time they had remade the Wolfman. They were made I Frankenstein. They made I Dracula. So they were toying around with recreating a monster multiverse. And then Tom Cruise's version was the Mummy, and I was like, that fails so bad because the Mummy wasn't a main character. It is a monster. It's a villain that you're supposed to fear, and they just missed so many marks with that movie, and it was so depressing because it could have really launched monster movies into a really cool direction. But I did hear, and it's rumor because it was on the internet, but it the only way they would make a fourth Mummy is if Brendan Fraser and the original mom came back.
Yeah, that's the only way I'd watch it.
That's
Because
the only way.
you both know and everybody else knows, I love Tom Cruise, and like all the movies he's been in, I feel like are masterpieces. A Few Good Men, Jerry Maguire, Top Gun, Mission Impossible, etc. That's the only movie Tom Cruise is in that I despise, and it was because they ruined the story. It had
Which
nothing.
says a
I
lot.
don't even know if the third. It does.
Yeah.
Because I didn't even know there was a third Mummy. I only watched the first two Brendan Fraser ones with him and John Hannah
Don't.
and the rest of the cast. Oh, believe me, I'm not going to.
Was it
I just
Jet
don't
Li?
think.
Is Jet Li the villain in that one? Yeah.
Yep.
Oh wait, at least okay, I have seen it. You know what? I didn't hate it. You said Jet Li, and that reminded me.
Yeah.
I didn't hate it, but I don't like it either. It's
Yeah.
just like I watched it, and I was just like, I love Jet Li.
Hmm.
Cool to see him in something, but I'm like, this just doesn't. It doesn't feel. And then when the Tom Cruise one came out, I'm just like, I love Tom Cruise. I'm like, usually what he touches turns to gold. I'm like, all right, I'm gonna go try this out. And then I watched it, and by the time the movie was over, I had drool coming out of both sides of my mouth, and I'm pretty sure I was paralyzed and had nerve damage in multiple parts of my body. It was like I said, it was just bad. Which it's surprising. Anyways, the it was really there's another one that I really like that's around similar to that, and it's not really mythology based, but Journey to the Center of the Earth,
Hmm.
the original first one,
Okay.
with Brendan Fraser. Since we were talking about it, Brendan Fraser one, and this one kind of delves into there's a little bit of mythology history kind of in it. Say
Yeah.
more history with the gal that he gets in
Exploration.
Iceland. Yes, exploration, and then you're learning that you can get to the center of the earth via this place in Iceland, and then you see all these different plants and species of plants and like dinosaurs and different stuff that exists. It's so cool, and
Hmm.
I that was one of my favorite kind of exploration type. Um, and then I watched the new one with Dwayne Johnson, and I don't feel like they continued the flavor of the first movie.
I definitely
Um,
think that one took a turn. I agree with you there.
It did. It just didn't feel the same, you know. And I'm sorry, Brandon. It's hard to top Brandon Fraser when he plays a certain role and
Yeah.
brings that aroma to it, dude. Like, I wish we had more Brendan Fraser, man. Like, I would love to see a Mummy TV show with Brendan Fraser and John Hannah, and just bring back the OG cast and crew and make a TV show about it and help people
They did
forget
have
about
an
the
animated.
Hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. They did have an animated TV show that took place after the second movie, which was pretty cool. I don't think it got a long run, but I enjoyed it. You got to see more of the son, and I don't think Brendan Fraser voiced the character, but I could be wrong. But it was still a cool little show to get more mummy feel from it. And it was animated, and we all know how we feel about animated movies. We can do more with them, so it was kind of cool.
Yeah.
So well, I've actually got three off the top of my head more. I don't know how many of these you guys have seen, Nathan, you mentioned Tomb Raider, which I do think is a great, granted, video game first, if I'm not mistaken, and then
Yeah.
turned into movies. But that's such a great world too. Plus, you get obviously the fan favorite female lead in a game or whatever with Laura Croft. But even still, you get an actual uh, story behind it, not just a
Yeah.
big busted female. But you get the idea behind it, like the movies with Angelina Jolie were super interesting, powerful female character. You get the history and the exploration and the fighting off people who are trying to use that for negative means. Uh, but Tomb Raider is a great one to bring up. I don't know. Obviously, Ryan, you probably have not read it, but I don't know about you, Nathan. Fablehaven by Brandon Mull.
Fable Haven? No.
Mm-hmm. It's a young adult book, which it's kind of cool because it takes the idea of like nature sanctuaries, which is a little different, but they're curators of the sanctuary, and it's all mythical creatures. So the fairies and the vampires and the werewolves and the witches and all these fae and whatnot live on these preserves, and the curators are the ones that take care of the grounds and make sure bad things don't happen. And obviously, it's a story, so bad things happen, and it's all about them trying to fix that. And then the other one I was going to bring up is Hellboy. The Hellboy movies are very history-esque, uh, and a lot of the time I'm thinking of the first one dealing with museums, creatures living there, and trying to bring back different historical figures. Like I think Rasputin
Yep.
is in one of them, and the Golden Army. So these things from history coming back up into the present time, and the very scholarly style of storytelling that
Mhm.
Hellboy tends to lean towards was pretty cool.
And I know you guys aren't as well versed with Doctor Who or Legends of Tomorrow like
Mhm.
I am. Um, but Doctor Who's another one of those shows where it's like you've got a lot of history elements, with the time travel and stuff, going to these different places throughout time. Maybe because there's like one episode they went to um, Italy for the Pompeii, the explosion of the volcano that just completely eradicated just destroyed that area. It was really cool to see stuff like that. Or they had a Robin Hood episode, which was really cool. Robin of Locksley, which is myth based. It's not actual real history, from what I know. And I think we've had probably characters that people who represent that type of heroism in our history of the world throughout times that inspired something like Robin Hood. Um, but like I said before, I would love to see another Robin Hood or even a Robin Hood TV show with Taron Egerton, who played the new version of Robin Hood with the Jamie Foxx in that last movie, because it was really, really good. But Doctor Who had a lot of those historical elements to it in certain spots, and same thing with Legends with the time travel. Um, so my question, let's see what my next question is for you guys.
While you think about that, I just want to throw out a couple more just honorable mentions. Um, The Librarian is not one I've watched a couple of the movies. I don't recall them very well, but it's one of my dad's favorite series. But it's basically a National Treasure Indiana Jones mashup of a guy who's going to recover historical um, artifacts that have impact or powers or things like that. And it's very similar between those two movies put into one. And they even spawned a TV series off of the trilogy of movies that they have in that one. And then I can't believe we didn't mention these two in our like time travel one. And they're two series I haven't watched, but I know about is Timeless was a recent one where they're jumping into historical moments in time and playing out either changing things or preventing people from changing things. And then Quantum Leap was a series that ran for a long time, back in the 80s and the 90s, where he was also time traveling and jumping into historical moments. So those were just a couple that I think a lot of people might, especially the older generation, remember.
Mummies Alive was an animated show when I was a kid, and it was kid is the reincarnation of the pharaoh. He enters a museum and he awakens these mummies, and they are his guardians, and they transformed and everything. It was definitely kids 90s cartoon, but it was super cool too because it brought up different historical elements in Egyptian cult and Egyptian mythology and whatnot.
Mm,
But that was a great show growing up. You reminded me of mentioning those.
absolutely. All right, Nathan, what you got?
Okay. For a movie, what would be your favorite movie? Well, I know you talked about Indiana Jones and stuff, but if you had to pick an individual standalone movie that's based on myths and legends or history, what would you choose?
For me, it would probably be Troy, the
Okay.
Brad Pitt one. And again, if you're a history buff, there is no evidence that Troy ever existed outside of legends and stories. But I think that story and the story of Achilles, like they really executed that movie well. And I'm not even a huge Brad Pitt fan. Great actor, but not like, oh my God, Brad Pitt, I have to go watch this movie. But I think he did a phenomenal job. I think the cast in that movie was phenomenal. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think Orlando Bloom was also in that. Um, I
You
think
might
he
be right.
played the
He might have been
prince
Dracula.
from Troy, but I'd have to double check. But that would probably be on if we're talking non-series standalone historical movies, I'd have to go with Troy.
How about you,
So
Alfred?
I don't know if this one counts, but it's similar to what we were talking about with like mythology and stuff. But League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, it
Mm,
touches on the different fictional historic characters. So like Captain Nemo, vampires, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, uh, all of those kind of aspects. And he's a big game hunter. You have that old school English attitude, which reminds me of the exploration era, uh, similar to the Mummy style. But that one probably is the closest I could think of for a single standalone that is curator like. Yeah, Orlando Bloom was in Troy.
Okay. Yeah.
yep.
He played Paris.
Hmm.
Have either of
What
you
about you,
seen?
Nathan?
I really like The Prince of Persia. Um, it's been a
Ooh,
really long
okay.
time since I've seen it, but I remember really liking that one. Or another one would be The Prince of Egypt. It was an old animated film,
Hmm.
biblical
Mhm.
about Moses and stuff like that. And I really enjoyed The Prince of
That is a
Egypt,
good one.
the old one. It was really good. But Prince of Persia, I watched that one a while back. It came out around the same time as like GI Joe, at least one of them. And I just remember it being really good. I kind of want to watch it again. Came out in 2010. Um, and if I'm not mistaken, it was what's his face who played Mysterio in Spider-Man, Jake Gyllenhaal,
Yeah.
who
Jake
did the role
Gyllenhaal.
in Prince of Persia.
Was that
So it was,
was that also based on not just history but a video game as well, like the Sands of Time or something like that?
yeah, The Sands of
Okay.
Yep.
Time. Yep.
That was a
Now,
video game that looked really cool that I never played, but
yeah, I think the best history video game, at least for me, in my personal taste, is Assassin's Creed. And I really like going through and discovering all the different places in like Italy, especially in the Ezio collection. And then going, you've got Assassin's Creed Valhalla, you get Assassin's Creed Black Flag, learn about all the old school stuff with like the pirates and everything else that was going on and out in the seas and stuff. And so I really like Assassin's Creed when it comes to those types of video games. And like I said, Uncharted was another big one for me. Um, did you guys ever see? Let me find the movie here. We already talked about the Clash of the Titans.
Hmm.
Did you guys see Spartacus,
Yes.
the TV
The,
show?
the
I've
TV
seen
show,
the
yeah.
original movie and then I have not seen the TV show.
So
I'm the opposite.
You're the opposite.
Yeah, I've seen the TV show, but not the movie.
And we talked about Troy earlier, the movie, and that also brings me to recognize The Patriot with Mel Gibson. That's a movie about the American Revolutionary War, a long time ago, obviously, but it was a really good movie on that side of things.
Absolutely.
Military history, and if we're bringing military into it, there's so many. Yeah, go ahead, Alfred.
If we're doing history, I got to bring up the Titanic because even though it's a love story, it's one of my favorite nautical mystery uh, tragedies that's ever happened. So when it first came out, I was like, "Ooh, I get to learn about the Titanic," and then I learned about a fictional love story. But being able to see the Titanic on the bottom floor and everything is one of my favorite parts of that movie, even though it's like the beginning 5 minutes.
I 100% agree with you. Like, again, not a huge Titanic fan, but there's a beauty in seeing things you know about from the past brought to life, no matter what the story they tell. Because if you look at, we talked about Journey to the Center of the Earth, anything Jules Verne wrote was years before its time, because everything they created out of fantasy has come to fruition in some way or another. Maybe not exactly how it was written, but we went to space. We've explored as far as we can in the depths of the ocean. Like, we've tried to do these things that we sought out to in that idea of, I wrote this, it should be fantasy, and then we created that history. And the reverse of that is there's history I'll never be able to see because it was before my time, and now I'm seeing it recreated in a creative way. And I think that's one of my favorite things. And I don't know if you guys want to touch on this too, but my favorite thing about these historical moments brought into books, movies, TV, whatever it is you get to take a moment in time or an item, a relic from time, and you get to give it a story that is unique to it that may not have existed. And one of the best shows I think that ever did that was called Warehouse 13. And it was a sci-fi show where they basically had Indiana Jones' vault where they kept everything that Indiana Jones found, went into a US military vault somewhere and got locked away forever. Well, Warehouse 13 was the concept that somebody has to watch that vault and make sure these items don't fall into the hands of bad people. So you would take like a shoe from Adolf Hitler. If someone else was to wear this shoe, it would cause them to do horrible things. Or so and so's spyglass would allow them to see into the future or something like that. So they took these historical relics from historical figures in time and gave each one a significant story that applied to it. And these people had to either solve what was happening, how to recover the artifact, or how to prevent so and so from taking over using these deadly or powerful artifacts. So I think that's the beauty of the media we're in, is we can take these historical moments and things and create amazing, crazy stories, or retell, like we talked about earlier, retell moments in a different light.
I 100% agree with you. I love history, but I don't have uh, the mental strength to sit there and research a large portion of it. I have much respect for people who write historical novels or know what they're talking about when they write historical facts. But what I'll or stories, but what I'll do is I'll pull, like you were saying with Warehouse 13, I'll pull things from the past that maybe I just know specifically about that item or thing
Mm-hmm.
and bring it into my story because I do think that they have elements that they can bring into another story or they could have a story surrounding them. And I'm glad you brought this up because it's one of the reasons why I love Indiana Jones. I love the Da Vinci Code. I love National Treasure because it's like, all right, everybody knows the Declaration of Independence. But have you ever seen the back of the Declaration of Independence? And then have you ever squirted lemon juice on the back of the Declaration of Independence and baked it in the oven and then found the map that's on the back of it? Like that kind of stuff is super cool. We all know that Jesus was a historical figure, but to say, oh, maybe he was just a man and had kids, and that's the Holy Grail, taking a different spin compared to Indiana Jones, who says, no, the Holy Grail is actually the Holy Grail that gives eternal life. And you have these different takes on these ideas, and you get to explore them. And it's a fun way to learn history because even though some of it is tweaked and there's poetic license for the story's sake, you still like,
Yeah.
ooh, that was an interesting idea. Let me go learn about that because this story really told an interesting, created an interest in me that I might not have had before. Again, like I said, the Titanic for me was great because even though the the love story was fictional, everything else was fairly accurate to what happened.
Mhm.
So that for me is super interesting because you get to see, like you said, Ryan, things that you couldn't experience. Thank God, because that would have sucked being on the Titanic. Uh, but getting to see things and experience them after the fact and learn about them and knowing what happened in history and seeing the beforehand effects is some of my favorite stuff with historical and especially the curator style of storytelling.
Mhm.
100%. And it's because they create movies too, and even TV shows like Highlander, for example. It's like, sure, it's not real history because obviously that doesn't exist. However, they take the whole aspect of going back to medieval times and then bringing that back up to present day and showing those flashbacks of what happened, like King Arthur, the Round Table, Excalibur, etc., etc. And you've got other movies that came out like Merlin, Excalibur, Legend of the Seeker, which was a TV show, excuse me, and different things like that. But here's a question, and I think we've talked about this before. However, I'll ask it again, just a little bit differently. If you could get offered to take over the role of a character from one of those movies, or be a historical figure, or live their life because you get like you get Hitler's cross or you get Hitler's T-shirt, and now you own the entire Fourth Reich or something like that. So, what would you choose to be a part of for a story or a movie? What character would you want to be or take over their life?
So I think Ryan and I are going to have a similar answer, but I'd love to continue Indiana Jones.
See, I I agree with you that that would be a good option, but I'd almost rather be Brendan Fraser's character in The Mummy than I would be Indiana Jones. Although I like both stories and adventures, but if I were to choose like a moment in time I'm going back to, then again, it's gonna be 300, Troy, like movies like that where I'm experiencing those legends that we don't know are true or not. And I would rather be those characters, even if I know the fate that I'm walking into is not an ideal one. I'd still think just being in that situation would be an incredible experience, unlike anything we could experience today, because what existed back then wouldn't be acceptable today. And you were talking about historical movies, you brought up a few, and it made me think of Gladiator, like the story for Gladiator with Russell Crowe. Like going through that situation, you could not experience something similar to that today. Yes, you have MMA, you have underground fighting and things like that, but the way gladiator sports were viewed back then, no one could create something like that today where it's universally accepted to you may live or die in that moment, and it's for the glory of somebody else or for your freedom. Like just situations like that would be my take on it.
I know I said that I don't have like the mental capacity to write this, but I would love to either read or write a historical fiction account of Alexander the Great and his library in
Hmm.
Alexandria. And like, because I just watched something documentary where it was like he died somewhat mysteriously. Like he had a heart attack, they think, but he was super young. He was like 32. So like, what was it that caused that? So I think there's enough lacking in history, which is why I think these stories resonate with so many people because you don't have all the answers. So filling in the blanks is the fun part where the story comes alive. So I think that would be a fun story to tell, the history of Alexander the Great at his peak. What happened? Why did he die? What actually caused all this stuff to happen?
I definitely agree. Nathan, do you have an answer to your own question before I go on a tangent?
Actually, no, I don't.
Okay. So before we got to this point, I was absolutely thinking the Great Library and like telling a story based on like finding it or what it was like in that day or what its real purpose was. Because a lot of people have the idea that like Alexander's library was where all magic was housed. Like magic used to exist in the world, and when it was lost, magic was lost in our world, or things like that. There are stories out there that center about that. But one of the first stories I ever wanted to write when I was back in high school, and this goes back to like Nathan writing his awesome story that everybody poo-pooed on, but they didn't deserve it. This was my idea way back in those days. I wanted to write a book based on Pangea, where the whole world was one, and all of these mythologies, gods, deities, all were under one deity, and they were the siblings of each other. And as the world separated apart, each deity kind of drifted to its own territory and fought for control through manipulation. Not manipulation is a bad word for it, but influence over the people in its territory, and gained experience later on through history and other places and reached further out. But what the concept for my story was going to be an archaeologist who goes to one area and sees a connection in a Mayan temple to something in Egypt, follows that connection to Egypt, goes into that temple and finds a connection to something else somewhere else in the world, and actually connects the dots of all of this. And that the story supposedly is that all these continents are going to drift back together and eventually come back together. Now, I wasn't going to write that part of it, but that's the omen or the telling that he discovers, is that they're all going to come together, and then all will be revealed in the end. And like grasping that when I was in like middle school going into high school, I was like, this is the story I want to tell, but I don't have the capacity, the knowledge, or the time to research what it would take to tell that story accurately, if which obviously it's not true, so it wouldn't be accurate, but to pull enough details to make it believable. But that was a concept I really wanted to tell. So anybody listening out there, if you want to take that story and run with it, be my guest, because I would love for it to exist. But that was like one of
That's
the
so cool.
stories I wanted to tell. So
Oh,
stunned silence.
so should we bring up, does it kind of fall into this category, Jurassic Park?
Yeah, kind of.
I
Because I
mean, it's more sciencey, but it's still got history elements because of dinosaurs, but and they were museum people, but
yeah, I think it's reliving the
more
past.
archaeologists.
It's similar to what Nathan was talking about with the curator in Ready Player One. It's still a museum devoted to that guy. He's still telling the history of that world. And Jurassic Park's the same way. You're telling the story of our past through reliving it because they found a way to do so. So yeah, I could see that.
Yep. Didn't work out for them as well as they probably hoped it would.
Uh,
Like, da 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 da. All of a sudden, wow, T-Rex.
Oh, that's a great series though. I do love all the Jurassic Parks and Jurassic World too.
Oh, you've watched the new Jurassic World
Yeah.
ones. I never
Yeah.
watched anything that's the originals.
Oh, they're all good in my opinion.
The um the last like historical type movie I watched, oh, it really wasn't even like history based, but it was Top Gun Maverick. It was a
Mm.
military movie. Um, is about the fighter pilots and stuff like that. But Ryan, you talked about what you would want to write if you were going to do, a history retelling or anything along those lines. I've talked about before that about doing the Titanic,
Hmm.
writing the Titanic story to make it not suck and to literally have mythology and stuff like that, where it's just not a romance. And anyways, Alfred, what would you write if you had the choice to do your own little retelling or anything along those lines?
I froze for a second. What was that? Uh, the last thing I heard was the Titanic doesn't suck.
Oh yeah, I said something that the Titanic sucks. So write something that doesn't suck along those lines. But Alfred, if you were going to get to write your own series or book of a history retelling or anything along those lines, what would it be for you?
I think I would go with the Alexander the Great, uh, creating his library, how he went about creating his library, and then how that affected his death. And I'd probably bring in my supernatural element side of it, maybe like Nephilim, because I don't really touch on them much in my main series. Actually, I don't touch on them at all in my main series, but bring them in, or something more Greek mythology based, uh, and just kind of tie it all in that way. But that's I pay homage to the Library at Alexandria in the Water Crystal. Uh, there's a place in essentially my purgatory where you can go and look at any book ever created, thought of, written down, not written down, and the entirety of the Library of Alexandria is housed there. Uh, and because it's not important to the story, the characters never do anything with it. But the fact that it's there is my homage to it, just because I'm with you, Ryan. Like I know at one point the known world was so interconnected because of the Red Sea and the
Hmm.
constant trading and all of that area. They knew everybody, they talked to everybody, and the knowledge that was housed in that library, even if it isn't magic, which it most likely isn't, but you never know. But at least like the advancements we could have made had that stuff survived, and how far back that set us really sticks with me.
I will always say if people can believe the Earth is flat, I will believe the library housed magic at one point.
You know what? I'm going to use that argument too because I love that.
Yeah, it's it's fun to talk about things that could be or
Yeah.
but yeah, absolutely 100%. Like so for any of our listeners out there and you're thinking about doing something along those lines, I say go for it. Write your own little historical retelling or your own little made up story and see what it sprouts into.
Hmm.
Um, but with that being said, your bearded nerdy hosts have been here once again to bring you gloriousness and wonderfulness, and we hope you enjoyed this episode of talking about the different varieties among these types of films and books. Um, and yeah, so as always, stay tuned for the next episode and funky fantasy the bowl Stratus arrows but it's the war of nerds. See y'all next time. Stay historical.